everybody, Earl at thelogbook.com, back for one more Shelf-Discovery Mini for this week. This is, as I've said the previous days, just a little something I'm trying out to do these little tiny, dare I say it, phosphor.fossils-sized excursions into my collection, just to see what tumbles out of the box and to see what I remember about that. And boy, do I have some specific memories about this one. It's Jar Jar. Who doesn't love Jar Jar? Well, a lot of people didn't love Jar Jar, and I've never really understood that. I've always thought that Jar Jar hating was kind of a dead giveaway that maybe you were taking things a little bit too seriously with your Star Wars fandom. But hey, yeah, everyone's got their opinions, but the action figure is actually incredibly well detailed. The funny thing about this is, this was one of 3 figures that I picked up at the Toys R Us in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm going to say this was like May 4th of 1999, because all of the merch for Star Wars Episode 1 landed nearly a month ahead of the movie. If you weren't there at the time, I'm not sure I can explain to you how hyped that movie was. When I was living in Green Bay, I was working at the local UPN station, which, boy, there's another thing that's that's hard to explain if you weren't there, because yes, there's a television network that no longer exists. Back when we had such things, back before streaming. It's like, all right, Grandpa, get back to bed. But Episode 1 was so heavily hyped. I remember the day, and I think this was either in December of 98 or January of 99, that they dropped the trailer online as is this tiny little video file, because a lot of your internet connections in 99 were still dial-up, and so the video file had to be a postage stamp basically to fit everyone's dial-up connection. And I remember all of us crowding around the biggest monitor we could find in the engineering department of the TV station where we worked, watching that trailer over and over and over again. Trying to pick out new things every time it repeated. And yes, we were on the clock, but, it was the engineering department of a TV station, so this was not frowned upon. This was, oh, you silly nerds over there. Of course you're doing this on the clock. What the heck? Why not? What I do remember is that the merch dropped weeks ahead of the movie at midnight. And some places like Toys R Us opened at midnight. Opened their doors at midnight of that fateful day so people could go in there and just immediately be the first ones to buy the merch. My buddy Clark and I from the TV station wound up going a lot of the same places because there was something wrong with his vehicle, if I remember. And he was either biking it or he had to catch a ride with someone. And so, I went and picked him up, and we hauled butt across town over to, because he lived all the way on the end of Green Bay that was across the Fox River. It's the Fox River, I think. And so I had to go all the way over to that side of town to pick him up. Then we had to go all the way back over to Toys R Us and, try to get there as close to midnight as we could. There was already a line We had no chance of getting in the store at midnight because they were only letting like 10 people in at a time. And we apparently should have been camping out since about 8, 9 o'clock the previous night, which was not going to happen given that we, both had to show up in the morning and work for a living. But so we got in the door, and Clark was not there to, I had already made the decision, hey, new Star Wars movies, I have been carrying my childhood collection around with me forever. I'm in. I'm all in on Star Wars Episode 1. All this stuff, I'm going to get it. And then I was like, oh, okay, I don't mean all the stuff. I just mean the figures that are in the same scale with the Kenner figures from the 70s and 80s. That's what I'm in on. And maybe some vehicles. And some posters. And the soundtrack. And possibly a book or two. Okay, it was all of it. Anyway, the thing about this is by the time we got in the door, the big stuff, the stuff that everyone was after, and basically anything with Darth Maul on it, had already been picked clean. It looked like that store had been hit by a hurricane. People grabbed stuff off of the pegs and didn't care if they knocked other things in the floor. They just grabbed them and ran with them. And so, I got back to where the action figures were. Keep in mind, in 99, this would have made me... I was about to turn 27 years old, going into Toys R Us at midnight to buy Star Wars action figures. As you do. And I got in there and, so many of the main characters were gone already. They were out of stock. Everything had been taken. What I wound up with was Jar Jar here. Watto, who was the owner of Anakin and his mother in Episode 1, the flying junkyard guy, and kind of the skeletal version of C-3PO where you could see all of his wires and gears and stuff, which that was another neat figure because it was so detailed. And I'm not even sure this video, as well, I tried to light it well, I tried to focus it well, and I tried to kind of have a succession of different lighting conditions to really show off. The paint job on Jar Jar was really detailed. Like there were like these little patterns on his skin that you could see, and I think you can kind of see them there. They did a really good job with these figures for Episode 1. I mean, it was a huge leap from where we had left things with Kenner. Now, of course, Hasbro had been doing new Star Wars figures since about 95 or 96 or so, and they had steadily gotten better. They had a really rough start because you had, super buff Han Solo and, super buff He-Man Luke Skywalker, and the princess did not look like Carrie Fisher at all. But over time, they got much better about it. That the initial fan feedback was taken on board, and so things improved. So by the time the Episode 1 figures came out, it was like, okay, I am going to get all of these. These are really cool. And you know what? I did. This was the last time I got all of the characters that came out from the Episode 1 packaging. This was the last time. By the time 2002 rolled around, and Episode 2, and Episode 3 in 2005, I was married, I had house payments, I had other obligations. I couldn't just be buying action figures willy-nilly. 26 and 3/4 year old me in 1999 had no such obligations. I just had to pay the rent and feed myself and pay the bills. And, man, whatever's left, Jar Jar. No lie. Jar Jar and friends. Jar Jar has so many friends. So many friends. In fact, I believe he's about to make a new friend right now. Oh dear, it's Mercutio. Poor Jar Jar, he gets no respect from anyone. The things I remember about this midnight toy run that I went on in Green Bay at the Toys R Us with my friend from work. I remember a guy ahead of me had 2 shopping carts full of different stuff that had Darth Maul on it. That was his thing. He wasn't going after figures. It was anything with Darth Maul. So it was like the Darth Maul drink bottle, the Darth Maul blanket, the foot-tall Darth Maul, the small Darth Maul, and maybe 2 or 3 of each. And so I'm sitting here going, great, I'm waiting in line behind a guy with 2 full shopping carts of Darth Maul. And then to my horror, he had to split payment for his 2 shopping carts of Darth Maul over 3 credit cards. And me with my 3 dinky figures, I suddenly felt much better about my life choices than the guy who was going to be paying for Darth Maul plus interest for, the next 12 months probably, at least. This guy had a load of stuff. And, I am under no illusions that was all for him. He was one of these guys who was like, oh, hey, this is the funny thing. There was this impression at the time. Oh, man, we've got to get, all the episode 1 stuff we can because it's going to be worth a fortune. They mass-produced it. They made enough for everybody. It's not like there was some instant scarcity. But people were acting like there was. There may be now, because, kids got these at the time and played with them, just like I had done with the original Kenner figures. And so, yes, there may be fewer minty fresh Jar Jars in the world than there are in 2024. Or there may be fewer in 2024 than there were in 99, is what I meant to say. But people at the time were like, oh man, I'm going to take all this stuff, get on eBay, and I'm going to be rich. It's like, no, you sit on it and wait for scarcity to happen before you sell it. But there were people there who were not fans, and you could kind of tell which ones they were. Now, there was one guy at that Toys R Us store who was a fan. I think he was a super fan. And he had a really unique way of showing it. He was on roller skates. And I am pretty sure he was trying to look like Qui-Gon Jinn. He had long hair, he had the beard, he had robes, and he had a jam box on his shoulder, blasting Star Wars music at deafening volume. He wasn't buying anything, he was just skating through the store. The problem was he really didn't look like he didn't look like he was doing a very good cosplay of Qui-Gon. He looked more like, you remember the movie Fletch, where Fletch is hiding from Joe Don Baker and the authorities, which very smart thing to do. I would hide from Joe Don Baker anytime if I knew he was looking for me. But Fletch dons this outfit where he's kind of like, he's got a bald cap, and he's got a hippie wig in back. So he's like a bald hippie in robes and sandals and roller skates. It kind of like derelict beach Jesus. That's what this guy reminded me of, was that scene from Fletch. He reminded me of that a lot more than he reminded me of Qui-Gon. But, of course, as we know, you could also go over to aisle 7 and pick up the soundtrack. And, look at the track titles a month before you see the movie. Oh no, track 17 is Qui-Gon dies horribly and has a funeral. Well, I shouldn't have read that. But anyway, those are my memories of that very strange night in May. I showed up at that store thinking, oh man, I'm going to be one of a handful of people here because I am an uber Star Wars fan. And there's not many people who are going to be more interested in this than I am. Boy, was I wrong. I realized that I was well on my way to becoming a boring adult. But you know what? Now I'm a boring adult with Jar Jar.